I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna refer to the chat over here and see what we have. Let me see if I can pull it up and see if it shows me you on here with me again. Hmm. Okay. No, for whatever reason, it's not bringing your audio through here.
Oh, my audio through even now, huh?
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not showing me your picture. It's not showing me your audio.
I'm gonna um, I'm gonna leave again and unplug my microphone and come back in without it. Do you think that might help?
It's worth a shot.
Uh-oh.
Jim's recording has stopped due to an incoming call,
Hmm.
but you're here, so I don't
I'm
think
gonna
there's
leave
anything
again. I'm
glitchy.
gonna leave again. Can you see me or you
I
can't?
can see you now. Yeah,
And you can hear me, right? So
I
if
can.
anybody, but nobody else can hear me because it's not picking up on the recording.
Right.
Hmm. Let me leave again and unplug my microphone headset and come back in without it. See what happens.
Okay.
Is
Perfect.
that okay?
Yep.
Bye.
Oh, wait. Now we're being told that we can see and hear you.
Oh, you can? Okay. It says I'm about to leave the studio. Should I hit cancel?
Yes. Let's hit cancel.
Hey,
Oh, yeah. I
it's
can see
if
you
this
now on the other screen. Okay.
if this was recorded, it would be a really good comedy.
This is
We could.
recorded
It's like
now.
Abbott and Costello.
This is the yeah, exactly. Who's
It's
on
like Abbott
first?
and Costello. Who's on first? Okay.
What's on second? Who the hell knows where Jim is?
Uh, yeah. Who the hell knows?
Who the hell knows? Okay, well, it looks like
Where's
we're
third?
working. I'm
Okay.
getting messages saying that now we can see and hear you, so that's perfect. Let me kick us off with a first thank you all so much for tolerating our technological ineptness. There's a list of reasons why neither Jim nor I work for NASA, and this is probably
Mm-hmm.
proof of that, right? We can roll out the list with this. But
I did email them. I did email them some advice about 9 months ago, 8 or 9 months, and those astronauts weren't able to come back. They might have listened.
oh, yeah.
Might have, yeah,
Maybe that was the problem. They took your
that was the
advice.
problem. Yeah, I made some
Well,
suggestions, but
well,
anyways,
we're not gonna
thanks.
make that
Thank
mistake again.
Yeah, thank all of you for being patient. we've been
Absolutely.
we've been like one of those. Robin Williams used to do this thing where he's in the space capsule, like going crazy, trying to get everything working. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but that's what it's been like.
That's
If the recording had been going, it would have been worth it for you guys to watch it. But
that's it. That's it. We
yeah,
even made a comment as we were texting and emailing and calling and struggling that man, we should be recording all of this. This would be
yeah.
interesting for people to see. It's
Hmm.
yeah, in the life of trying to do live video podcasts. I have people ask me this all the time. Doesn't the pressure and the stress of doing it live, like doesn't that add to it for you? And actually in a call, I think it was
Not up
yesterday.
until now.
Not up until now. Yeah, now it does, right?
Yeah.
Jim and I made a joke. I think it was yesterday in a Zoom meeting that we had, where the true mark of a professional is that things still go wrong, but we get bothered by it less.
Yes.
So
We try to remember that. That was a test. This was a test of that.
this was a test. Yeah, exactly,
But we're here
exactly.
now. We're here now, and we can relax and enjoy it, and just have a conversation, and
That's it, and we'll go
yeah,
from there. So
go from there.
yeah, I want to thank everybody again for hanging in there with us, refreshing your screen probably 800 times, just as we did.
Hmm.
But joining us for episode number 62 here of talking about horses. And I'm joined today by my friend Jim Masterson of the Masterson Method. And Jim, thank you so much, not only for just joining me for this or agreeing to do this with me, but for all the hassle that you've gone through to get on here with us today.
Yeah. Well, it's worth it. I'm well. We'll see. I'm sure it's
We'll
worth
see.
it. Yeah. Well,
We'll
we've
see.
yeah. No, it's worth it. It definitely is. No, I
That's
I
good.
always enjoy having a conversation with you because you're a professional and you don't get upset when things don't go quite right.
Right, right,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
you
So,
can keep a
well,
happy face on.
we keep it. Well, I mean, that's all we can do, right? Is keep the happy
Yeah,
face on, keep the smile going, because in the end, I'm over here in Virginia. You're what, in
in
Iowa?
Iowa. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in Virginia. You're in Iowa. Somebody just checked in. Mary said she's checking in and saying hello from Yorkshire. So we're coming in, or Yorkshire.
Oh,
So
Mary,
we've
is that
got,
Mary?
we're making
Is,
connections everywhere.
okay, is it Mary Sargent? Ask her. I don't. I think Mary Sargent is.
Maybe I don't know.
Oh, you can
Mary
ask her.
just said hello. Is this Mary Sargent? See, this is going to be great on our
Yeah,
on our.
we don't want to do this with everybody, but
Yeah, Jim wants to know. And I know there's a like a moment delay as we do this.
oh, okay,
But anyway, yeah. So
we can
we
get
have
on.
folks coming from all over here. So this is really great. And again, that's, it can be so frustrating to try to do these things, but also
Mhm.
at the same time, it's amazing that we're able to do this
Mhm.
when we can get it to work, and
Yeah,
we can be states away or half the world away and still
it
have
is
the same.
amazing. Like how many people can come together and have a conversation like this? I mean,
Right.
20 or 30 or who knows, 40 years ago, there was no way, right? No way to
Exactly.
do this. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So certainly grateful. Oh, and Mary says yes. That is the Mary who
Oh,
usually
okay.
speaks.
I was afraid of that. I mean, nice to see you, Mary.
There we go. Perfect. So we want to talk today, Jim, about, of course, several things, and we're going to keep people hanging and waiting
Mhm.
even longer than we've already done, which
That's
does
okay.
not sound like a great way to thank them for their patience at this point,
Mhm.
but we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, let's go.
We've got a great announcement for them that we're gonna put up there later on in our conversation here today. But we want to talk about what it means for a horse to be an active participant in a session. And your insight coming from the bodywork side of things is great. And there's the horse as an active participant in a training session also. So
Hmm.
I'm curious. A, a large part of what you do with the Masterson method is based on the horse's responses and based on the horse
Hmm.
actually being an active participant in the process. So what does that mean to you? The horse
Well,
being an active
yeah,
participant.
it's like there's so many different aspects of that. Whether in training or in doing body work, you're working with the same nervous system of the horse, the same brain of, the same brain. And um, from the body work point of view, it's I'm going to use an example when we use the bladder meridian, going lightly over the horse using no pressure, and it's the same whether you're asking for movement or manipulation as if you're doing the bladder meridian, what we call search, response, stay, release. When you run your finger lightly over the horse anywhere in the body, but we start with this line called the bladder meridian, and you put no pressure, what I call air gap, literally no pressure, and you go down the horse's body and you watch for a subtle change in behavior, any change in behavior. The thing we look at the most is the blink. The eyes will blink or the lips will twitch. Means the horse feels something under that. If you stay there and just wait there and do nothing, you're not pushing, you're not rubbing, you're not stimulating anything. You're waiting for the horse's nervous system, which just felt something. You're waiting for the nervous system to go from a little bit of guarding it, sympathetic, because there's something uncomfortable there, a little bit of that. So you're stimulating a little bit of sympathetic, and you're waiting for the horse's nervous system to go back down into the parasympathetic and just release some tension. So you're waiting for the horse to respond to what you're doing rather than just doing something to the horse and
Mm,
making it respond with pressure. I think
okay.
that's like there's so many aspects to having what does it mean to have the horse participate, but that's one of them. You're waiting for the horse's nervous system to respond and feel safe and then do what it's going to do. And so it's I think it's a similar thing in training. You're asking for things and you're not making it uncomfortable for the horse. You're not giving the horse a choice of, okay, you can do what I want or you can be uncomfortable. You're not doing that. You're
Okay.
just there's this kind of a subtle difference between those two things, that you're stimulating a little bit of something in the horse and you're waiting till the horse participates in it,
Hmm.
or responds to it in a like non forced manner.
Okay. Okay. So then how do we read, uh, you know, is not sometimes a blink just a blink?
Well, if you,
right?
yeah, that's a good
Everybody's
question because
different.
that comes up all the time. So if you go around the horse's body and you get some kind of change in behavior, usually a blink or lips twitching or something, and every horse is different. Some are very stoic. Say you're going down, you get a blink. Let's use the blink. And so you wait there and until the horse, something else happens. But if you're not sure if it's you or the horse blinking at something else, go back over that spot again.
Mhm.
And if you get the same response at the same spot, there's a correlation between what you're doing and the horse is doing. So you can check that. If you're not sure it's you or the horse or something else, you just go back over. That's one thing. The next thing you can do is just wait there and see what happens, without going back over it. And pretty soon,
Or just
the
pause when
interesting,
you recognize.
yeah, if you
Okay.
recognize it. So there's a kind of a learning curve to this, as with anything, right? With horses, if you go along, you see a blink, and you say, I'm pretty sure that's the horse feeling something. If you can still, you wait there, and if the horse at some point releases the tension and shows you the release signs, like licking, chewing, letting out a huge sigh, yawning repeatedly, then that means it released some tension. So the key is the correlation between what you're doing and the horse is doing. That's how you can tell.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. So you talk about being there, waiting there, when the horse has given you this signal, right?
Showing
Or
you
when
some
it's
some change in
blink.
behavior. Hmm.
Yeah. And then we're talking about the releasing of tension.
Hmm.
I think I have a two-part question.
Okay.
One being, how are we actually stimulating that to release tension? And then the other being, how do we know that it's tension being released?
Okay. So I didn't really know, when I started doing this. I was grooming hunter jumpers, and I noticed these subtle changes in behavior, what I call responses, when therapists were working on the horse, whether they were doing, massage or generally often lighter, like myofascial release or craniosacral. I noticed these little changes in behavior, and that's what got me interested. But what was the question again? I got off track.
um, how are we activating
Oh,
for the release?
oh,
How are we
how are we
getting there?
activating? So I saw that if the horse told you something was there, and if you just waited there. I wasn't trained to massage or anything, so I just waited there to see what happened, and then there would be a larger response. Like the horse would drop its head, it would start yawning, it would lick and chew, it would shift weight from leg to leg. Just they were kind of obvious signs that the horse had relaxed something, even just overall. So you could see visually what the visual responses are. But when we're doing
So
the
it's just
techniques
being
that,
there in proximity with where the nervous system is signaling to us that there's
yeah,
something.
yeah, there's something there. And we're bringing the horse's awareness to that spot because they survive by blocking out discomfort in the wild. If they just start limping the minute they start to feel,
Mhm.
then they become a target. So they just instinctually cover
They
up
fight
stuff and
their
keep,
lameness for a living.
yeah, they keep
Yeah.
going. That's why it's so hard to evaluate lamenesses sometimes, because they're so good at covering till it becomes so uncomfortable for the horse that they have to show it.
Gotcha.
So you'll see the visual releases, but then when we start doing the movement techniques, they're gentle manipulations, and it's similar to what you're doing on the ground with groundwork with horses. You're asking them to move in a relaxed state, in a way that, one, you can see where the restriction in movement is in the horse. When it's relaxed movement, when they're all tense, you can't see it. And when they're all tense in their body, you can palpate a horse that's like way up in the sympathetic, and unless they're extremely sore, they're not going to react unless they're really sore.
Right, because
So
they're blocking it out.
yeah,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
blocking it out. So there's a certain level, and I only learned this later. I knew that there was a part of the nervous system that blocked out discomfort and what I call tension or pain or discomfort or tension. And there was a part that released it. I could see that when the horse released.
Okay.
But later on, working with Dr. Stephen Peters, the science of it, there's a certain level of sympathetic activity in the horse, even when they're relaxed and they're out grazing or whatever. But if they have pain or discomfort, they're covering it up. And so there's a certain level of that sympathetic. And so, but they're blocking it out. And so when you run your hand lightly over the horse with no pressure, they'll tell you where it is, because they can't brace against no pressure. They can block out pressure. They can't block out no pressure. So they'll tell you, and if you
That's
wait
such
there,
an interesting key right there to think
that's the
about.
key.
They can't
Yeah, they
brace
can't block
against
out.
no
They can't block
pressure.
out nothing. And when we do the movement techniques, we start with nothing and then ask for relaxed movement, like going down the neck. If you start with like what I call lemon pressure, which is very hard, that's what the horse is going to start with. But if you start with nothing, that's what the horse starts with. And then as you go down the neck, if you hit a spot where there's like in somewhere down the vertebra of the neck where there's tension or restriction, they'll brace against the movement. And then when you soften your hands, they'll release the movement. So you're just stimulating the sympathetic a little bit, enough for them to feel what's going on. And then when you soften, then they go back to the parasympathetic. And this is all me just guessing at what, Dr. Peter says, putting it together. But then when you soften your hands, they let go of that tension and then you can move through it. So you can feel when the tension is released or not. If it hasn't released, you can feel it because or not. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And that's something that, I try to coach students all the time. Like if you're not adding to it, it's not resistance, right? It's a conversation. And so that's really interesting there with that idea of, again, that key point that they can't resist no pressure.
They can't brace against nothing.
They can't.
And the cool thing is, like, there's such a huge correlation between training the horse, which is basically, I guess, interacting with the horse in a way that you can get some certain behavior or movement out of the horse. Mm-hmm. But there's such a
Here he's coming back. I think looks like he's coming back.
Are you still there? I lost you for a minute.
We are still here. We are still here.
Yeah, I had a reconnecting thing going on. But the horse learns the same way, it learns in the parasympathetic. It'll learn in the sympathetic, but it's not going to really be learning with you and trusting you. It's learning because of you, because
or even in spite of.
In spite of you, just to find the easiest way out. So
yeah,
this all goes back to what doing it with the horse, where the horse is participating with you or just participating because, in spite of you.
Yeah, I want to check in here. It looks like somebody's sending a message that it's just me again. Uh-oh. Can anybody post another message on here? I'm sorry about this. This is crazy.
I know it's because Mercury's in Gatorade.
Mercury is in Gatorade. That's the problem. Yeah. It looks like it has just gone back to me. And now we've said, I got a message saying, there he is.
I had a little disconnect. It might have been in my internet. It said reconnecting, so it might have.
Yeah, let's see. Okay, it's all right there. I see us both on here now. This is crazy.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, let me see. I think.
So we were talking about Mercury being in Gatorade, and that's what's causing all of the problems with us here. And yeah. Anyway, okay, so we're back now, and okay, good. It looks several have now said that you're both here, so now we just look like fools talking about this. Can you hear me now? Anyway, so we were saying about the horse being the active participant. The horse can't resist against nothing, which makes perfect sense. It's such a great way to say that too. And then you were talking about then the horse being able to release that tension, and you're working with the horse instead of on the horse. And I think that's such a great distinction to make, whether we're training or whether we're doing body work. It's that idea that we're working with the horse. When it comes to the body work side of things, the horse is the feedback mechanism, and I mean, essentially, the horse is the body worker, right? In that respect,
you're bringing you're bringing the horse's awareness, whether you're just using very light touch or gentle movement or manipulation. You're bringing the horse awareness to where it's been blocking out or covering up tension, to survive. You're bringing the horse's awareness to it, and then you're softening a little bit. You're not and then if you bring the horse's awareness to it, and then you back off a tiny bit, the horse will release it.
Okay.
And then it'll tell you with what I call the release responses: licking, chewing, yawning, letting out a big deep breath, dropping its head. Uh,
Mm.
and or if you're doing the movements, it'll tell you, because then you can actually move that part of the body that you weren't able to move before.
That was otherwise held in
Yeah,
restriction.
that was, yeah.
Okay.
Because you can
Okay.
force it. You can make the horse bend, go down the neck, and it's going to bend, but it's not going to release the parts that aren't working. It's just going to brace with the, the other parts, the other muscles.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. And somebody actually, Mary has posted a question, different Mary, posted a question here. Can you remove too much tension? I think that's an interesting question.
Yeah. So, um, but what do you mean by too much? But there is a too much. Like sometimes you can uncover issue that the horse has been covering up for maybe years. And a good example is that of
Okay.
that is sometimes I'll work on a horse that, the rider says, well, he's sound, he's not lame, but there's something going on behind. Or, he, all of a sudden after a certain amount of work, he'll start to cross canter behind, or he won't go down hills.
Mhm.
He kind of rushes down the hill. So a lot of times you'll uncover a groin muscle strain that the horse has just been covering up for years, because it doesn't tell you when it has a problem unless it's really bad. And you uncover it, and then all of
Sure.
a sudden the horse is off because you've taken away his compensation for a problem. So in that sense, yeah, you can release too much tension, and then the horse isn't able to compensate for an injury or an issue. So
So you've
that
opened the
happens
can
quite a
of
bit.
worms, so to speak.
Yeah, so you got to either be able to explain to the owner, we've uncovered something here that you've recognized something's going on for years, and now we've
Yeah.
uncovered it, and your horse is going to need a few months to recover from a groin injury. But in general, say the horse doesn't have anything in like specific that it's been compensating for, and you just like, I mean, you just release everything, and the horse is just like jello. They're you've released tension that's been building up and building up, same as with us, and then you're not going to be able to take away their muscle tone. As soon as they go back and go to work, they're going to be moving better. For maybe
Hmm.
it takes 4 or 5 days for the horse's nervous system to process really big changes, but after that 2, 3, or 4 or 5 days, the horse is going better than before. And I just know this from experience, because that question comes up a lot. Like, the horse needs a certain amount of tone in their muscles to function, but
Sure.
the problem is that it builds up, builds up, builds up, and pretty soon you have restricted movement, and you have asymmetrical movement in the horse, because they don't build up tension evenly, just like us, unless they're being ridden really properly. But
Hmm.
as this tension builds up, you can release it, but it's the muscle tone's going to come back. You can't. The
Sure.
only time it's going to cause a problem is if there's a problem that you've uncovered.
That's
Does that
perfect.
make
That
sense?
makes sense. So you're not causing the problem as much as you're unveiling the curtain,
Yeah, that
right?
question comes up sometimes, but I don't know. I'm not sure if it's coming up because of people are intellectually thinking you're going to take away, you're going to take away all the horse's muscle tone, or if
Mm.
because their actual experience is that something isn't right after you've done the body work in the horse. And the thing is this, I mean, this works with the horse's nervous system, so you can release some really deep tension, like with this, by not using pressure. I mean, the horse
Hmm.
can't brace against no pressure. And so I don't know if those
Right.
questions come from experience that they're having, or from just like, intellectually thinking the horse needs a certain amount of muscle tone. But, and with a professional athlete, a human athlete, what do they say, at the end of the football game? Yeah, get out of here. We'll see you tomorrow. No, they go in and put them in a jacuzzi thing. They have trainers that are massaging them and everything,
Hmm.
and they're not worried about that. They're worried about getting them back to, a more natural um, gait or movement,
Yeah.
in a sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And I think, from my experience with both the Masterson method and other forms of body work, or work in
Mm-hmm.
general, I think sometimes um, the natural concern underlying for a lot of people is, if this can do so much good with me doing very little, how much bad, potentially, in air quotes,
Mm-hmm.
bad, can it do? Is that something that you can unlock a can of worms and you can do negative, or are you seeing that as
Well,
a generalization, it's only going to be positive?
I'm not going to say never say never, right?
Hmm.
But with the thing about this method is that if you're not using force or pressure, how much damage can you do? The horse, when you ask for movement in the horse, whether we're going down the neck, what we call lateral cervical flexion, or the scapular releases or the hind leg releases, when the horse, if you're doing a scapular release where you're asking the front leg to relax, the scapula relax down, it's not a stretch,
Mm-hmm.
and the horse all of a sudden feels the tension in whatever muscles that it's feeling it in the scapula, and it pulls back, you don't pull against it. Like, that's the principle of this. You can't,
Right.
if the horse braces, you got to yield. And if the horse pulls or braces and you pull against it, which is our natural relaxant, then you can hurt the horse. But when the horse pulls and you yield, you can't hurt the horse.
Right. And this goes into your principle, and I quote this principle all the time in the
Mhm.
in handwork that I teach, the
Yeah,
principle of non-resistance.
it's non-resistance, and the horse will, once the horse gets that you're not resisting against, it'll follow that. When there's
Mm-hmm.
resistance, the horse will brace against it, and ultimately they'll win that battle. But
Right.
when I see a horse dragging somebody around by the lead rope, and I take that horse, as soon as the horse starts to pull, if you bump against it, you can use as much pressure as you need, as long as you yield immediately. You can say
Mm-hmm.
no as long as you say yes right after. They'll start to follow the yes after 2 or 3 bumps, because they'd rather go follow the path of least resistance than pull.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's not tug of war if there's nobody pulling on the rope.
Yeah, you can say no, but you got to say yes immediately. You know,
Gotcha.
they
Yeah, yeah.
pull, and you bump and you yield. You bump, you yield. And you do that 3 times, and pretty soon the horse is just following the yield. And that's the
Following
same
the
in
yield.
training, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're saying if the horse is saying no because you've brought their awareness to tension, that now they're saying,
Mhm.
"Hey, I've been holding on to that
Right.
for however
Yeah, that's what
long, you know."
happens. Yeah,
Yeah.
they have a kind of a surprised look on their face, like, "Oh no, how'd you
Mm,
find that? I've been covering that up for years." And then you soften a little bit, and then they let a little bit of it go in layers.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
often when you have a horse that's pulling against you on the lead rope, they're dragging somebody around. They've just been trained to do that by somebody.
Exactly. Exactly. When you
Yeah.
feel this way and then you
Hmm.
feel this pressure,
Then
you
they
know,
keep pulling.
they keep
Yeah.
pulling. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's
Hmm.
actually it's interesting how easy it is to teach a horse to lean into pressure or to
Yeah.
resist against pressure, or even, I've sometimes in the past I've used the term a spoiled skeptic, which is
Hmm.
kind of a little bit of a play on words, but it's like, well, we thought they were a little worried, so then we avoid things, and then
Hmm.
when we get into situations they've been taught to avoid, whether they're concerned or not, right?
Yeah.
And I think that
It.
that can be really really tricky then on the other side of that, trying to re-educate the horse that, hey,
Yeah.
here's an alternative response that you can give. So when
Hmm.
you're dealing then with the and I've got a couple questions that I had written down here, and this is going
Hmm.
off script because I think this is maybe a little more interesting, at least for me. So I hope
Hmm.
it is for anybody else. But when you're working with the horses that have been, I'll say, trained to resist the lead rope and
Uh-huh.
trained to pull against you,
Yeah.
how do you then know if they're saying no,
Yeah.
or not now, or I'm worried, or I can't, or I just don't
Hmm.
want to eat my broccoli? Like, what,
Hmm.
how
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
we distinguish between those?
Yeah. That's a good question too. Um, um, when you first go to work on a horse, let's say, I'm just think of an example. I use that we have a technique called lateral cervical flexion, where you use the nose
Mhm.
to gently wiggle your way with the other hand down the vertebra of the neck. And you hand on the nose. First thing, soften your hand. That's the hardest thing. Not the hardest, but that's the first thing that you have to teach people, because they don't know that the weight of their hand on the nose isn't is weight. So
Mhm.
hand on the nose, soften. Other hand, you start up by the atlas or anywhere on the neck. Put your hand up there, soften both hands. Start with nothing. Then you're focusing the wiggle with one hand on, let's say, just behind the atlas or the first vertebra. And you don't have to know all the vertebrae. You just have to know, put it here. And then when everything's soft, you gently wiggle the nose. You're focusing the wiggle up here. Gentle, relaxed movement of that first joint. And then you soften both hands, slide your hand down, bring the nose around a little more so they're flexing maybe at the next couple vertebra. Soften, wiggle. As you go down, you might hit a spot, if you're doing it softly enough, where the horse feels some discomfort in the connective tissue of that joint. And so they're going to pull their head away and brace. And so you soften the nose hand, and then when the horse relaxes, you ask again, and usually it will have released a little bit of that tension. So sometimes you put your hand up there before you even touch the horse, their head's in the air, head shy,
Yeah, yeah.
the head shyness, um, scientifically speaking, 99.9.4663% of the time, it's tension in the pole. It's not a trained thing. You don't train. And how do you tell if it's trained or the horse is just doing it because it's learned? Well, you ask again. And then if you can't get past a point, then there's a physical component.
That
So
makes a lot of
sometimes
sense.
it's fear. When you first, and a lot of horses get uncomfortable. When you start to find their stuff, their first response is, don't go there. And so you wait
Mhm.
until they relax, and then you ask again. And if you ask again and they release, and then you go farther and they release, if you get a point where you can't go past that point, there's something there that's all they can handle at the time. So you have to stop there. You don't force it. Is that
Okay.
is that kind of answering the question?
I think so. I think so.
Uh,
Yeah. And
because their first response, a lot of times when you go to work on the horse, it's like a little kid. I don't want to go to school. I don't want to eat my broccoli. I don't want to eat
I
my
don't want to eat my
broccoli.
broccoli. Yeah.
Yeah, so you got to soften
And
and
that's what
say,
you're saying. Like,
okay,
don't touch my tension,
yeah.
right? Like, don't.
And so
That's mine. You can't take that. Don't
yeah,
touch
so
that.
you,
Well, and for a very real perspective, from a prey animal's perspective,
mhm.
I'm still alive. So holding that tension obviously is the right thing to do,
Yes, they don't
right?
have any other option.
Yeah,
You're offering
right.
them another option.
Yeah, and that option can be concerning to start with,
Oh yeah, yeah.
right? And so
Some
then
horses
our
don't want you
human
to.
side, our human
Mhm,
tendency to, you know, make things happen, we run into
mhm,
that tension, we run into that resistance. The first thing we want to do is the same thing we do when we're riding, is the same thing we
mhm,
do when we're doing groundwork or in hand work with a
mhm.
horse. There's a resistance. I'm gonna bang away at that resistance. I'm gonna push on it. I'm gonna work on it
Well,
until it softens, like as if the horse is like just a
is
block
on
of
purpose
clay.
being, yeah. Oh yeah,
He's just
or on
being a jerk,
purpose being
right?
a
Yeah,
jerk.
he
Yeah.
just doesn't
Mhm.
want to relax. He
They
doesn't
don't know
he
how to be
doesn't
a
want
jerk. They only know
right.
how to respond to something that they're feeling. That's all they know. They can't make up a story around, you know. Yeah. And it's interesting because there's such a mesh with the way, with horse training, with the body work. I see from the body work point of view how this so
Absolutely.
blends with horse training.
Absolutely. It so
Yeah.
much does. One of the things that I tell my students constantly, to the point they might even be sick of hearing it, I don't know, but we're gonna keep playing it. I'm gonna keep saying it, is that, our riding and our work in hand, our work on the ground, all of the training that we do with a horse is a form of body work.
Hmm.
But then I always throw in either to the benefit or to the detriment,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
right? Like the way that we approach them, the way that we work
Hmm.
with them, we can teach them to be more braced. We can
Or you
teach
can
them
teach
to be
them to be
resistant.
more relaxed and mobile and not firing muscles that don't need to be
Exactly.
fired, rip over and over again, which is even worse. So
Exactly. Exactly. So it's like,
yeah.
can we when we approach our horse in anything that we do, can we
Anything.
approach our
We're
horse
all
in such
horse
a way that
trainers. We
helps
just
them to release tension?
Yeah, we're all horse trainers, whether you think you are or not. Everything you do, the horse is going to pick up on, and it's going to interpret it in a way that it can protect itself. Everything we
Yeah.
do, like I think Tom Dorrance in his book said, the ride begins when the horse sees you get out of the car.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
how tuned in
exactly.
they are to body work. Instantly, that's when the ride begins, and then they're going to respond or react. I like the word I prefer response because it's much subtler than
Mhm.
react in some way to what you're doing with it, that its survival is at stake. They're a survival animal, and we kind of sometimes forget that. We think that that they're in tune with us. We love them, they love us. They do, but there's another priority for them, in their nervous system. It's to survive.
It's to
That's
survive. Exactly.
It's been there a lot longer. It's been in there a lot longer than we've been around.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So true. And I think that one of the things, like you said, as soon as you get out of the car, that's where your session would begin, or as soon as they see you, right?
As
Whether
soon
you
as
get
they
out of the
see you,
car,
I
they
mean,
see you in the
it's
paddock or
amazing.
whatever.
It's amazing how subtle they're tuned into body language, and or
Mhm.
maybe energy. And I don't know about energy. Everything's energy, but I'm not a energy feeling person. But they're so tuned in that even the way they see you approaching them, if you're not paying attention,
Mhm.
when you get closer and you see their eye widen a little, or you don't see anything, but when you get up to them, they're just like this. Well, that might have something to do with the way you approach them. And if you just like start to notice that and slow down,
Mhm.
like I noticed that, when a horse, before I, approach a horse, I won't just step towards the horse. I kind of shift my weight to the other leg. You know how they do,
Mhm.
they're standing around in a bunch, and then they're all, their legs relaxed. And then when they shift, they relax and shift to the other leg. One horse picks up his leg too quick and they all kind of, whoop, what's going on? So
Yeah,
if you
exactly.
shift your weight a little bit from leg to leg before you approach the horse, like you may not see a change in the horse, but you'll notice when you get close to the horse that the horse is more relaxed than if you just
Mhm.
walked up to it, picked up your leg, foot, and walked up to it.
Right. Right. Well, it makes me think more about the word conversation,
Yeah, there's a
right? Like all
two-way
of this
thing
is
there. Yeah.
conversation, and we can have conversations with people in passing. And I think a lot of horses do that way, right? They have conversations with people in passing if they're being led
Uh-huh.
from the stall to the paddock or something like
Yeah.
that. They can
Mm-hmm.
have conversations. Maybe you go to get your driver's license registration renewed, right? And you have to take a
Mm-hmm.
ticket and wait in line. Everybody gets all frustrated with that,
Yeah.
right? There's a frustrating conversation that
Mm-hmm.
nobody really wants to be there, not the guy behind the window and not anybody in the chairs, right? Nobody
Or
wants
in
to
the
be there
line waiting or
in the
anything,
line,
right?
exactly. So everybody's kind of cranky and crabby at each other,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously I'm generalizing, right?
And you can
Uh,
almost just feel that, you don't even have to see it.
mhm.
You just feel it. So,
Yeah, like when you talk about the energy, right? Like it's
mm-hmm.
how hard is it to tell, like when you're in line at the grocery store, how hard is it
Mm-hmm.
to tell that the guy behind you is really anxious,
Yeah.
right? We don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily think about that as a conversation, I guess, because we're not having a chat like you and I are
But
having
it
right
is,
now.
but it
But
is
it
an
is,
interaction, right? It's an
yeah, it's an
interaction
interaction
on
and an
some level.
energetic conversation. And that's,
Yeah.
horses don't, for the most part, don't have the verbalizations to go by. They're
No, they don't.
primarily body English, body language,
Yeah.
individuals much more
Mm-hmm.
than they are vocal individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's their main form of communication. Really, I mean, body language to the point that it's so subtle that to me, anyways, I had a vodka tonic while I was waiting for our technical so I might be going off a little bit here. The body language gets so subtle to the point where it's almost energetic with
Mhm.
horses, or horses and anything else, people or any other animal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
So
so
it's
then, of
internal,
course,
like it's
your
an
body work
internal
is the
thing.
same way, right? It's
Yeah.
energetic in that conversation, and our training
Yeah.
is that way in our conversation. I like
Hmm.
Mary put a comment on here. They know our intention. We just need to
Yeah.
be aware that they know. That's such
Yeah.
a really important thing to think about, is whether we're aware of it or not, they
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. So they pick up on your intention. Yeah. And I say that a lot. Like an example, like a really good example is when you go to pick up a horse's foot, and you're thinking, I want to pick up the horse's foot, or I want him to give me his foot. And you go to pick up his foot, but you already think, well, I'm going to have to pinch, squeeze the flexor tendons, or I'm going to
Mhm.
yank on the fetlock or whatever. That's always in the back of your mind. When and I just caught myself doing this at one point, and I realized I do this every time I pick up the horse's foot. I say, give me your foot, and I step in and I put my hand on the foot, and 90% of the time they pick up their foot on their own, because
Mhm.
when I say, give me your foot, I'm clear on my intention and they pick up on my
Yeah.
intention. But if you're not clear on your intention and the horse is resisting you, it possibly because you're not clear on your intention. But when you say, give me your foot, you're clear. You want
You're
the foot.
clarifying your
And they
intent.
give
So
up
it's not
and
that
they
they
pick up their foot.
understand English, right?
No, they don't understand. Sometimes they're Spanish horses. Sometimes they're Dutch horses. They have a different word for everything. Those people over there. I don't understand it, but
Right? And
But
yet the horse understood the intention, and that's such
yeah.
a big thing. And again, that's something I preach to my students all the time. Your
Hmm.
intention is your number one aid. When you're
Hmm.
riding, when you're doing groundwork, when anything, your intention is your number one aid, and that's exactly what you're getting at right there.
Yeah.
When it comes to clarifying your intention, horses are
Hmm.
so keen at picking up on it. You know,
Yeah.
it's interesting because they're so good at it with each other, particularly, right? Like you watch,
Hmm.
what is it, the emergence, I think is the word for, when the school of fish all change direction at the same
Oh
time,
yeah.
or the
Hmm.
birds fly at the same time, and horses'
Hmm.
legs will time up when they're, galloping through the pasture or trotting through the
Uh,
pasture. And the closest that we get as humans is a traffic signal and the Starbucks drive-through, right? Otherwise, we're
hmm.
just clanging and banging into each other and
Yeah.
things like that, right?
And
And
even then.
horses know that, right? Like
Hmm.
they know that they tend to know that of us as a species, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, those
We're
humans, they
bringing
have no idea what they're
we're
doing.
bringing that all that stuff to the table that's unconscious even for us, some of it.
Yeah.
And so that's why I like I find myself telling the horse everything I'm doing, talking to it as if it understands. It doesn't speak English. Give me your foot. It gives me a foot because I'm clear on it. So if you think if something's not going right with the horse, you may think that you're clear on your intention, but there's always a doubt in the back of that intention. Is it
Mhm.
going to happen? Is this going to go the way I want it to? Is it what? But if you just say whatever it is you're doing to the horse, give me this, give me that. Like he doesn't understand, verbally what you're. I mean, you're clear on your intention when you say something, and then they pick up on that.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah.
weird,
That makes too
I
much
just
sense.
I just recognized this the last few years that I'm talking to the horse constantly when I'm working on it, and people are watching if I'm doing a demo, and they're thinking, "What's this guy doing? He's talking to the horse." But I'm not talking to the horse. I'm talking to myself, and the horse is picking
Yeah.
up on it.
Right. Well,
I
and
do
it
talk to
changes,
I do
we
talk to
could we
myself
could talk
sometimes,
about how
but
that,
yeah.
self-talk influences your body, right? That
Hmm.
we have that, I believe it's referred to as the idiomotor response. The gist of it basically is that
What'd
you
you call
can't
me?
think, right?
Oh, idiomotor. Sorry.
That you can't think a thought without your body making a change,
Uh
right?
huh.
So if you're thinking in the back of your mind, there's going to be resistance, there's going to be worry, there's going to be concern, there's
Mm.
going to be a fight or whatever. Well, what's your
Hmm.
body preparing for? Right?
Yeah.
It's not preparing for what you're not
It's
thinking about. It's preparing for
I
what you're
know,
thinking
and
about.
it's important just to be conscious of that.
Hmm.
Am I preparing for resistance or a fight or whatever, or something not to work out? It may not, and you're aware of that possibility, but you have to kind of make sure that's not interfering with what it is you want to accomplish. And
Hmm.
we're getting into, like, I don't know, psychology or new age stuff, but when you're clear on stuff
Right.
and you say you're clear on it, you are, then things align that way. We won't get
Hmm.
into Tony Robbins or whatever that other stuff is, or you
Yeah.
hear that all
Right.
over the place. But there's something to it. If you're clear on what you want, and it's hard, it's not easy.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I love that you said that, if you're clear on it and you're clarifying things. And so when we run
Mhm.
into a resistance with our horse, or when we run into trouble with our horse,
Mhm.
well,
Or
like I'm
people.
thinking primarily from the training perspective, right? But
Yeah.
also
Right.
knowing this from the bodywork perspective,
It's the same.
instead of saying no, you're wrong. The horse gives what we'll call a wrong answer, right? The horse
Yeah.
gives a response that is not what we're looking for. We, instead of saying no, you're wrong, because that changes our intention, right? Like,
Right.
I'm prepared for battle. If
Yeah.
we offer that correction, adjustment, however you want to say it, as
Hmm.
let me clarify,
Hmm.
right? That completely changes the intention behind
Let me
that. No,
clarify.
you're
Yeah.
wrong, or let me clarify.
Yeah. I mean, you'll recognize that's not what you want, and so you might say, even if you say no, you're wrong. You gotta, okay, and let go of that. What do I want? But the horse isn't really wrong. you know
Right.
they're only doing what they're being asked to do, or they're responding to input. There's no right or
Exactly.
wrong to the input. So so you're saying, let me clarify that. Like, that's the if you start to think, no, this isn't what I want, or you're not doing it right, to the horse, if you can, every time that happens, it triggers, let me clarify that. And from a
Mhm.
training standpoint, what you just said makes complete sense. Then all of a sudden, the horse switches from bracing to, oh, okay, I'm going to go this way. They want the path of least resistance. You have to provide it for
Exactly.
them. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And it goes right back to that principle of non-resistance, and that the horse
Hmm.
can't resist against nothing, you know.
Yeah.
And of course,
Hmm.
not that there's never, or not that there's always a nothing when it comes
You're
to
right.
training, right? If we're developing
Hmm.
the horse physically, if we're developing our aids, of course there's a conversation, a physical conversation that's happening through the direction of our aids and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. But it's the underlying conversation of that. Like I
Yeah.
will say, when I put my leg in this position, when my seat is in this position, does that mean half pass to you? You know, one of the
Hmm.
things I try to always think about with the horses is from even the first time I start a young horse under saddle to up through, maybe we're doing tempi changes and pirouettes. It's I think of it less as, don't try to think of, I'm going to make you do this.
Hmm.
It's more, what does this mean to you right now?
Hmm. Yeah.
Right? Because
At
there
the
is
point,
no there's no wrong answer to that. What does
there's
this
no
mean to you right
there's
now?
no
The horse is
wrong
always going to
answer.
tell you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
And
Just to be
that's where I
aware.
think
Just
the
to be.
idea of the body work comes into that also, right?
Well,
Because
yeah.
if
It's
you're
the
saying, I
same.
want you to do this, and the horse says, well, that's hard, and you push into that, well, now you're
Hmm.
creating more tension, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And yeah. And that's a built-in safety mechanism as far as body work. If you're coming across a physical issue or maybe an injury or an old injury or a new injury, doesn't matter. When you run into the resistance, you soften and see what the horse says. If they're able to release some of that, fine. If they're not, you move on. If they're not, you after the third try of anything, that's kind of a rule of thumb. You stop and do something else with the body work
Okay. Okay. And that
because
goes
the horses,
into a
yeah,
question that popped up in here, and I've lost it because there's some great comments that are happening in here. Oh yeah, from Nadine. If there's excessive tension on one side, would you switch sides? So is that getting into what you're talking about here? Like the third time you've come into a situation where the horse says, "No, I'm not comfortable with that."
right.
Is that when you go
You
to the different side?
Yeah. So, and that's a good point because you're first off, she's recognized that there's something, not working on one side that's working better on the other side, right? You recognize that.
Mm,
So, but there's another principle that we have, a kind of what I call a rule of thumb. Principle is kind of a fancy word, rule of thumb. That you start where it's easiest for the horse. So if you go to do something on one side of the horse and it's way too much for the horse, you do something different. You either go to the other side or you go somewhere else to do something else. The first thing you do is go to the other side because you can release a lot of tension on the tight side by or the yeah the restricted, uncomfortable, tight, whatever side, by going and doing it from the other side, from the easy side. You can release a lot of that tension on the hard side by doing it from the easy side. Then you can come back over to the easy side. So it's that's one of the rules of thumb. If it's too hard here, go there, and usually the other side is the side. And then you'll come back. If you say you go to the left side, yeah, okay, I'm going to go work on the right side. Then you go back to the left side. Wow, I didn't even do anything on the left side, and it's
mhm.
already better because I released it on the right
And do
side.
you think a big part of that is that you've kind of flown under the surface or under the radar of that tension, and the nervous system in general has
I
just
guess
become
in
more
general,
expensive?
yeah. I guess in general, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that one. I can only guess, but in general, you've released, overall, like, just allowed the nervous system to let go, and that, just to let go. The
Hmm.
whole, all the core muscles and postural muscles. Sometimes you just need, one thing to help the horse just let go of the whole nervous system, and then it's easier to work everywhere.
Mm. That makes a
That's why
lot of
you
sense.
don't just attack the problem. When you attack the problem, you're just training the horse to guard it even more.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
and that's another example of how you're working with the horse instead of on the horse. The horse is
Instead
saying
of on the
something,
horse.
you got to listen to them. And then it doesn't mean when the horse says, I don't want you to touch me at all, that doesn't mean that. It means, I know you don't want to go to school, and I know, but everything you'll have fun once you're there. So you don't,
Mhm.
you understand what they're saying. No, but you have to understand that you're there to help them, and their instinct is just, no, I can deal with it. I'll just, get through life, covering this up.
Mhm.
So you have to say, that's one option, but I'm going to offer you another option.
Yeah, right. So you stick
Yeah.
with that um, in in
In
a
a different way, in a different way,
supportive
in a way that,
way.
yeah, in a way that the horse can handle it.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the answer right there, isn't it? Like that. Yeah, you
Well,
approach it in the way that the
I
horse
see
can
so
handle. Like I
many,
think that's
I see
everything.
so many things in the overlap, so many overlaps in the way that you train a horse. The way you train a horse, and the way that a lot of trainers train a horse. And that
Mm-hmm.
brings up another thing. Sometimes some trainers, like there are a lot of things that a trainer is trying to push through that has a physiological component. Let's say like the horse can pick up one canter lead, or they can't, but you can't. They won't pick up the other canter lead. So you keep training them to pick up the other canter lead, and they can't, or they're having trouble. There's
Mm-hmm.
there's a good probability there's a physiological component to that. If they can do
Yeah.
something on one side, you can easily train them to do it on the other side, unless there's something in the way. Like, you know what I mean? Have you found that to be the
Yeah, that
case?
makes a lot of sense, and
Like,
that's that difference in recognizing when they're saying, I don't want to,"
mhm.
versus, "I can't."
Well, if they're saying I don't want to, then you ask a different way, and you keep trying. But if there's a block there, then there may be something else going on, and you have to
Mhm.
recognize that. There may be something else going on here. It could be dental, could be the saddle fit, it could be a hoof or a lower foot and lower leg issue. Who knows? But if
Mhm.
you keep running into that block, some trainers can train a horse to work through a lot of pain and pick up that left canter lead or that right canter lead,
In
no matter
spite
what.
of
And it
whatever's
takes a
going
lot,
on.
they'll just
Mhm.
keep working at it and get the horse to do it. Well, they just got their horse to do it. But is that good for is the horse covering up something that's going to show up down the road? If you want to put it into
Mhm.
practical terms, in 2 or 3 years, that horse might go lame, or it's not using it, it's not loading its legs in a balanced manner, and you're going to end up with, you know, ligament or tendon injuries or something, because they're
Mhm.
doing it because you've made them do it, but they're using their body in a way that's not gonna last. And
Right.
sometimes that you got to put it in those terms in order for a trainer to understand. Yeah, well, maybe I want to do something that's gonna make my horse last longer.
Mhm.
Mm.
Mhm. Exactly. That makes a lot of sense. If it's not, if it's not light, it's not right, is something that I like to think about when it comes to working with a
Yeah,
horse.
yeah,
If it doesn't feel like they're willingly offering what we're asking,
right.
then
And you want
then
to
they're
you
not
want to
active in the process.
yeah, but you want to try. You want to try. Sometimes it's training issues. They're just not getting it, and so you want to train them. But some of the red flags for me are if they're able to do something one direction and they're having a really hard time the other direction. You're really having to push against it. It's not because they all got together last night and said, "Hey, let's not pick up the right canter lead tomorrow."
Right.
They and I like that Gary Larson, the Far Side cartoon, where all the cows are out in the pasture, they're leaning on the fence, smoking cigarettes and everything, and somebody yells "car," and they all get down and graze. And then the car goes by, and they get back up and start smoking. They don't do that. They don't decide, we're gonna, horses. If they're having trouble, really having trouble doing something, um, one side as opposed to the other, there's possibly a physical, component to it, or something shows up all of a sudden they're bucking
Mm.
after the jump, or all of a sudden there's something else
Mhm.
going on. It could be, you look at it, okay, have I changed the saddle, have I changed the bit, have I done something different, am I giving them like 10 scoops of sweet feed and 4 flakes of alfalfa all of a sudden, and
Right.
but
Exactly.
if all of a sudden something shows up, there's something going on, and sometimes it's
Mhm.
all this, there's something physiological or some discomfort that's shown up, or they've overstrained a muscle, if they're training hard,
Mhm.
and it's bothering them, something physical bothering them.
Right. I think
So
there's
those are
four
some of the red
big
flags.
lies when it comes to our horses or our horsemanship. Those
Hmm.
four big lies are all of a sudden, out of nowhere, for
Uh-huh.
no reason,
Hmm.
and without warning,
Hmm. Yeah,
right? Because you
right.
never hear
That's
anyone
exactly,
say,
yeah.
all of a sudden, I just got the
Hmm.
perfect 30-foot sliding stop.
Hmm. Yeah.
right? Like out of nowhere, we just did this
Yeah.
beautiful canter pirouette. No, nobody ever talks about stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
It's
Right. Right.
always
Right.
about the negative things, right? And those
Yeah.
negative things really never are all of a sudden out of nowhere for no reason without warning. Sometimes
Hmm.
we aren't aware of what's shaping up before those things happen,
Yeah.
right? But
Hmm.
it just doesn't work that way. It's not out of nowhere, you
No,
know.
they don't.
And so that
There's,
actually makes
yeah,
me think when we're talking about how sensitive the horse's nervous system is, and when we're talking about going over the
it
bladder
isn't it.
meridian and waiting for a blink, how much of an issue is a thing potentially by the time we feel it in training as a big resistance?
I'm going to look up the word paradox because I think, isn't that a paradox? Like they can have such a sensitive nervous system. At the same time, they can cover up almost anything to the point that they're just lame.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
well, I turned off my laptop, but I'm not going to
I
turn.
was gonna say just
Isn't that what a
don't touch the
paradox
phone.
means? Yeah, don't. I'm not touching the phone.
Don't disconnect
Anyway,
us.
they can be so sensitive and to that kind of input. That's how they survive. They survive in the wild by being so aware of their environment. You know, that's how they survive. But on the
Yeah.
other hand, they can just put up with so much.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
To the point that they seem completely callous to everything going on
Well,
sometimes.
eventually they shut down. You know,
Hmm.
the unlucky ones. You know, the ones that right
Right.
away say, yeah. You know, when I was working on the hunter jumpers in down in, you know, I got started down in Wellington, and I was fortunate to, when I was trying to build up my bodywork business, you know, early on I had maybe 6 horses a week or something. I'm living in my camper, and then I went to work for this farrier pulling shoes, a really good horse show farrier, pulling shoes for him, and you know, because he was doing tons of horses, and he was friends with another guy who worked for Dr. Steele's practice for 20 years as his vet tech, Bill Stanton. And Bill went off to do body work. He wanted to do body work. So he left the practice and he immediately had like 200 clients. He was swamped. So
Oh, wow.
I went to work for him through the farrier I was working for. And I went from working on 6 horses a week to the first day. He said, Jim, just tell me how many you can do comfortably. And I said, probably 6, you know, a day. And I did 13 the first day. So the whole 9 or 10 weeks in Wellington every season, both of us worked on 50 to 60 horses a week. And so
Wow.
I like, it was a huge education. So I worked on a lot of horses like every week or 2 weeks. So I could see where the changes were, you know, were happening in their body. And I forgot
Hmm.
where I'm going with this, but there's got to be some point to this. Um, what were we talking about before I started this
We
story?
were talking about your paradox of the horses being so sensitive, and yet some of
Oh yeah.
them,
Oh yeah.
just learn
Some
to shut down.
horses and so horses are so different. Like some horses are so tough. They would just keep putting up with like say the coffin joint. They keep going and keep going. They'd just be complete, you know, from the leg all the way up to the pole, and then the rest of the body is so tight. And then I would work on him. I remember the first time I said, "No, I'm going to get this tension out of the pole on the right," and I did too much on the horse. And the next day he was lame. I called the owner and I said, "How's he doing?"
Okay.
And she said, "He's lame on the right front." And I said, "Wow." I said, I really worked on it. He was really tense in the right pole and upper neck. He was tight everywhere, but that's what stuck out. But he was compensating for that coffin joint. She said, "Oh, he's due for his coffin joint injection," you know? And so he was
Oh,
so tough, he could cover it up and he wasn't lame. He was still going to go. But fortunately, she recognized that I released all that tension. Now he couldn't protect his right front. And so she
gotcha.
had and that was her, you know, I'm not for, joint injections every 6 months just to keep the horse going, but that's what he needed. And
Hmm.
then other horses, I would work on a horse, and then the the trainer would say, I would say, I feel like something's going on here or there in this, foot or the other. And they say, oh, that horse is just a drama queen. Those were the horses that started complaining right away, you know.
Hmm.
So as soon as they started to feel something coming up, they would complain.
Yeah.
And the other horses are so tough, they'd keep going, keep going, keep going. And so
Until they just can't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's funny. I would make the comment, "Well, this horse is," and I could tell, week or 2 weeks, every week. Some of them are every week, some are every 2 weeks. I could tell when they would be loading one foot and then compensating with another foot in the front. They go back and forth, and
Mm.
then by what you're feeling in the body, certain muscles tighten, tense up.
Mm-hmm. Uh-oh, we lost his connection again. We'll give him a moment to check back in here. Hopefully he gets back in here soon. Nick, I see your question here, and I'm gonna. Uh-oh, he's bouncing in and out. I see your question, Nick, and I'm gonna ask him that about the shoeing needing to change. That's a great question.
Okay, I'm back. Am I back? Can you hear me?
Okay, okay, you're back in here. I can hear you. Um, and hopefully everybody else can hear you
Yeah.
also. If not, they may have to just catch this on the replay because I will be posting that, gang. I will be posting the replay. So it looks like we're still
Are
good
we
here.
all good?
Seeing,
Okay.
I think so. So actually, Nick, as you were talking about the horses loading different legs differently
Hmm.
and working with the farriers and things like that, Nick has asked a question: have you seen shoeing have to change from this work in order to make a horse more comfortable? That's something that I know can be an issue. Like when we think about
Yeah.
correct shoeing to help a horse to be
Hmm.
comfortable in the body they're in, as
Hmm.
we start offloading the tensions that a horse is holding or the resistances that they're accumulating and the compensatory movement patterns, are you finding then that shoeing patterns have to change to match the new body?
Yeah, I don't. I since I'm not a farrier, and I won't double guess the farrier unless I see something that's really obvious, which you wouldn't find in most sport horses because the farriers generally know what they're doing. Given the lifestyle of the horse, and
Mm-hmm.
and its job and its. So I won't double guess, but I found that nor usually the farrier will adjust to the horses, like when you work on the horse and their posture changes, that they'll adjust their trim and shoeing to the new posture, because you can shoot it. But generally farriers, they the ones at that level know what they're doing, and otherwise they know what they know. But I don't really double guess them because I don't know more than they do. and
Yep.
um and they every once in a while you come across a farrier that's a little hard-headed. It doesn't happen often, but and they you know but I find if you when they'll notice is when you work on a horse and all of a sudden they can work with the hind legs where they couldn't before, then they'll start to pay attention to the body work. But
Yeah.
generally,
Right.
they do what they do. I look at everything that's going on in the horse in the terms of body work. You look at things from the point of view of training. The
Mm-hmm.
farriers look at from the point of view of the feet. But I noticed that after you work on the horse, often the posture is more natural posture. You'll work on a horse that's standing like, a goat on a basketball or something, or
Mm-hmm.
out behind or something. And then you do the body work and they'll stand in a more natural posture. And then the farrier will shoe to that posture, which is healthy, I think is healthy, rather than
Mm-hmm.
the farrier shoeing to a compensating posture. They're compensating for whatever tension is going on in the body.
Mm-hmm.
So unless I see something really that I think is really, really awful. And then how do you handle that? You can't just say you can't tell the owner the farrier is doing a terrible job here, because the
Right.
farrier is not going to hear that. It's like they're immediately going to brace, right? So you got to
Mm-hmm. Right.
soften. And the way that I handle that and that we teach when we're teaching, our students that are, go do certification, is you ask questions rather than say, oh, that saddle's a terrible fit, or
Mm-hmm.
that I wouldn't shoe my horse that way, because you're going to just run into resistance then. So I'll ask
Right.
questions, how are his feet? And the owner will offer up something. And if I think there's a foot problem, I'll first ask, how are his feet? And they might say, oh, well, he's about due for his injections, or he had an injury here, if they're not in the, show world, he had an injury here a while back, or, you know, he's got vicular. So you never know what the farrier's, in the process of changing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
we
Right.
ask questions and just kind of maybe guide by asking questions and pointing out things we're seeing mainly in the body that might lead the owner to say, oh, well, maybe he needs this or maybe he needs that. But
Mm-hmm.
I guess the answer to the question is, in an indirect way, if I come across something, I'll try to address it not by saying something that they're not going to hear.
Yeah.
The owner isn't going to hear. They're going to think when you say something like, "Oh, I think your saddle's hurting your horse." They're going to hear what they hear is, "Oh, you're saying I'm mistreating my horse, or I don't know what I'm doing," right? But if I palpate and show, well, he's sore here, here, and here, it could be a lot of things, but it could be the saddle. How does the saddle fit? Often they'll come up with thinking, I don't know, maybe the saddle's part of the problem. So,
Yeah, sneaky how you put that in there without
well,
offering
it
something to resist against.
it is a little sneaky, but it's like Masterson method for people. You run into
Right.
resistance, or you're going to run into resistance. You soften just a little bit, and then that opens the door for them. And you work with people that way. I mean, you're really good at working with people and horses, so you know what I mean, right?
Right. Yeah, it is that way.
But
You can't it's funny because I don't know that I would have said it this way exactly before this conversation, but it doesn't matter what the species is. You
mm,
can't go into that conversation abrasively and expect it to be received softly.
yeah, right.
Yeah,
If you start with nothing, that's what they start with, and then you go from there.
there you go. And
I
you go
mean,
from
not
there.
nothing, because you got to present something, but you want to present it in a way that they're going to hear it. The owner, for
Well, and I
example,
think
or the rider.
underlying in that is that intention that you talked about, right?
Right.
Are you intending to make a fix, or are you intending an inquiry,
Yeah,
right?
or do you
Are you
want to be
asking a
right? Or
question?
do you want to show what you know and be the one that that's right, or be the one that you know what you're doing and they don't? Because that happens. Well, it doesn't happen as much when I started doing this body work as I was expecting, because when I grew up, you know and I was a kid and all the horse people were adults, like they all, there was a lot of opinions and they knew the way to do things, and maybe at the time they did, but I was expecting more of that when I started teaching this, and I didn't run into it very much, which was a nice surprise, that people were open, to something new and listening. But when you're saying, go back to the horse that's dragging you around by the lead rope, you got to offer them some opening. You can bump them, you can use as much pressure as you want, as long as you soften immediately. You can say no, but as long as you say yes right after, because that creates an opening. It's the same with people. You can bring something to their attention, but you got to immediately allow, for them to come back to you on it.
Yeah, exactly. It's
And I talk
interesting,
as if
Jim,
I know what
how
I'm talking
similar.
about. I'm,
Oh,
I'm
I'm
just
sorry.
I talk as if I know what I'm talking about. Like, that's the theory, but it's my theory. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If it doesn't work, you got to do something different.
Well, there you go, right? And
Yeah.
that's something that Ray Hunt used to say all the time, was that he would always be adjusting to fit the horse. And he would say,
Mhm.
and I've always found that to work, because if it wasn't working, well, I'd just be adjusting anyway.
Yeah, right.
So,
You might as well get the benefit of it working.
right, exactly. We're just going to keep adjusting until we find something that works, right?
Yeah.
But
Uh,
it's I think it's such a fascinating interplay, and a great way to be with the horse, how this body work and the training have such similarities. Jim, I think we ought to get together and share our thoughts about that sometime.
well, what do you think? Maybe we should get together and like do something like with the horses and the owners and the riders.
That would be a lot of
Let me.
fun, wouldn't it?
Yeah. When do you think we should do that?
Well, I actually was, while we were struggling to get this broadcast going, I happened to find a website. I happened to find a website, a web page, handinhandclinic.com, and it said that you and I are, in fact, getting together this September, and we're teaching a clinic together that is hand in hand, an integration of classical horsemanship and body work. I think that sounds like a
What
great
a
idea. Are you going to
br-
be
what
there?
a what a brilliant idea. Where do I sign up?
Where do you sign up for that? Well, you just go to handinhandclinic.com, and you'll find all the information on how to sign up for that. I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. If you tell me that you're going to be there, then I'll be there too.
Okay, I'll be there. When is it? Oh,
Okay,
I
perfect.
should have reversed those two questions, but I'll be there.
Good. Good. You'll be there. That's perfect. So that's going to be September 12 to 14 this
Mhm.
year. We're going to be doing that. And that's actually going to be happening here at my home base in Natural Bridge, Virginia. So I'm really looking forward to that. So for anybody listening, definitely check out that website. Again, that's handinhandclinic.com. And you can find out all the information about that, and you can register to come visit with us as a participant with your horse, or you can register as an auditor as well.
Yeah. Actually, Patrick and I have been working on this. I don't know if anybody could see through that. But yeah.
They couldn't
Well,
tell.
we met at the Best Horse Practices Summit quite a few years ago, and it was you know when you click with with people sometimes, and I recognize that you're on the same page, and Daniel Dauphin, the bit guy, was on
The
the
big
same
guy.
page,
Yep.
and we all happened to be at the same place having beers, and so that's the way nature works.
That's that's it
Yeah.
exactly. Well,
Hmm.
just like you said, it's the it gelled, it meshed. That was
Hmm.
such a great event, that Best Horse Practices
Hmm.
Summit in 2022. It was so neat to be part of that because everyone was able to play off of each other
Yeah.
presentation wise. There was
Hmm.
the things that you were doing, I was able to relate to in my presentation. The things that Josh Nickel was doing, he was able to
Hmm.
relate to what you and I were both doing. And you and Josh are doing something together here pretty
Yeah,
soon
we're doing
also,
it.
aren't you?
We're doing a clinic together in Canada. I don't have the date. It's in May. We're in March. It's in April sometime up in Calgary,
Okay.
just after the Canada Horse Expo. So um, yeah, we're doing. It's on my website and Josh's website. If you're a Canadian,
If you're a
yeah,
Canadian, you need to be there. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
If you're at the
No,
Horse Expo, just
I
stay
think
a
it's
couple
great.
extra days.
The
Yeah.
collaboration, I think it's so important, particularly when we've got similar focuses and yet we're coming from different perspectives, right?
Yeah.
In the
Hmm.
horse world, it is such a thing that we're always working on, you and I both, from the bodywork perspective, from the horsemanship perspective. It's about getting the horse to be an active participant in that
Hmm.
process. So to me, it's just such a natural. It just goes hand in hand, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we can share, like just sharing that information, it's kind of a shift in the way things are done. It used to be, a little bit, you kept your things close to yourself and there was a lot of competition. But now it's cool that we can recognize when people are on the same page and we have the same message and we can share it, from different perspectives because it is the whole horse. It's all, you got to do the training right. You got to do the body work. I mean, right, in a way that's going to be beneficial for you and the horse and the training and the attack and the bit. The first thing that Daniel said at the Best Horse Practices Summit that got me, here's this big old Louisiana cowboy. You think what's he doing at the Best Horse Practices Summit? But first, he was a lot of fun, and
Yeah.
he's a very smart guy, and he's very approachable and easy and a good teacher. And the first thing he said was, "What's the first thing that first point of contact between you and the horse with the bit and the reins?" And he said, "It's the lip right here. It's the lip."
Hmm.
And you would have said normally the bars or whatever. It's the lip.
Right.
That's where and that's he knows what's going on. So
Right, exactly. You
that's how
talk about
sensitive.
the
Yeah.
the intention of
Hmm.
developing your feel with
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
I think, yeah,
So it all
that's
fits together.
so great. Exactly.
That's why we're all doing these things together.
It does. And I
Mhm.
think that there's not just presenting the ideas together, but one of the things that I've always noticed in the past is when someone has done body work on a horse and I've come in, say I'm training the horse
Mhm.
and I come in after the body work has been done, the body feels easier to work with. Of
Mhm.
course, right?
Yeah.
And I
Mhm.
remember specifically a barn that I used to teach at quite a bit up in New York, where there was an acupuncturist that used to come frequently to the barn. And one day she said to me, I always know when you've been here because I can
Oh,
feel it in the horses and how much
right.
less they need the
Yes.
acupuncture afterwards. And that was
Yeah.
the first time I really thought that, whoa, this works both
Yeah.
directions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
That's
Like,
you
I
got
thought
it
I
at that point.
intuitively knew that, but to have her come out and offer that as a, "Hey, I
Mhm.
I knew you were here," because
Yeah.
I could feel it in the horses. It's like, man,
Mhm.
that is what we're doing here. This work is, I think it's important to bring it together conceptually,
Mhm.
philosophically, and in the methods and the techniques that we're
And yeah,
using. And that's
on
why
a
I'm so
practical.
excited for the format of this clinic as well, that we're
Yeah.
gonna be, not just kind of talking to people in chairs, right? But that
Mhm.
we're
Yeah.
actually going to be working in
Working
you and I together, working with horses and people throughout the
with
whole week.
people and
I'm really
horses. Yeah.
excited
Through the,
about that.
yep. And sometimes at these clinics and events, the auditors get like the best deal, right? They're saying horse after horse after horse
Absolutely.
after horse.
Hmm.
Not that I don't want people to bring their horses and be, participate, but the auditors, like, they don't have to do anything. They're just sitting and watching all this happen and just kind of seeing for themselves what's working and what's not working and putting it together.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. And actually, I'm going to share this with you right now. This is really fantastic. But for anybody who's listening, definitely go to that website, handinhandclinic.com, because Jim, I think we've already got half of the participant spaces filled now.
Okay. Hmm.
Our first group, we're going to have 14 participants in that, and it looks like half of those spots have already, just since
Oh,
our
okay.
conversation, been filled.
Well, we only have
So
to have one
that's
more
great.
conversation and we'll fill the other
That's it. We'll fill the other half.
half.
Exactly. And now we've got the tech figured out, so we know it's going to work.
Whew, that was that. I'm glad. Well, it was worth it. Actually, was worth it. It was really good conversation. I hope people haven't dropped off and gone to sleep
Right?
or whatever.
No,
But
it looks like
it's recorded.
our numbers are really great. So Jim, lately I like to close with some kind of closing questions, some wrap up questions here. And I'm going to go through and just edit these. We're going to do just a couple of these instead of the whole mass of them.
Well, I'm in no hurry, so we can go on.
Oh, okay, perfect. Good. Well then,
Once I get talking about this, I can't stop. So
I know the feeling. Okay, so I'll
yeah.
add 10 or 12 questions to this then.
Okay.
No, so what's one thing that you would say that riders can work on or think about to make their horsemanship better this week?
Well, I guess maybe some of the basic principles we're talking about is, well, that's a good question. I'm going to bring up, maybe open another little can of
Okay.
worms. So, um,
Both.
so when you run into resistance, you soften, right? It's principle of non-resistance. Or you can say no when the horse is dragging you. You got to say yes right away. But there's a gap there that you need to fill with the next question. So you run into resistance,
Okay.
you soften. Well, you don't just let go of the reins. I'm not a trainer, but I'm just going to say, you don't just, even with bodywork, you don't just let go. You just soften a little. You created an opening to ask again. So um, if you're riding, and you run into resistance, the horse is pulling, you soften a little. You don't have to just let go, because you might be teaching the horse it's okay to brace, but you soften a little and then you ask again. And not being a trainer or an instructor, just from the bodywork point of view, but it crosses over. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
when you
So you're not
soften,
abandoning, but you're
you're
engaging in
not
the
abandoning the
conversation.
horse and just saying, okay, that's it. You're saying, no, you're offering an opening there. You soften a little, they stop bracing, then you can ask again, maybe in a different way, or the other
Mhm.
way, or I know that it's getting a little bit too philosophical, but
Well,
that
I think
would be my
that's a great
answer.
concept. I mean, when we think about it with our half halts,
Mhm.
right?
Half halt, yeah.
That it's not just one big thing, right? Or it shouldn't be one big thing. A half halt,
Mhm.
it would be oftentimes we find a sequence of half halts from one stride
Right,
to the next multiple
yeah,
times until
right,
we find the balance we're looking for, or
yeah.
whatever it is we're asking for. Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, I didn't think of that. That's kind of like what a half halt is, but you're a half halt consciously, half halting, and then you're waiting for a softening, and then you're asking
Mhm.
again, rather than just 50%, 100%, 50%, 100%. No, it's not. It's
Yeah,
like,
right. That's a good way to
yeah,
think about it. Yeah, yeah. You're really being mindful and aware as you're going in that
a
process.
mindful half halt. Yeah,
Yeah, I like. Oh,
yeah.
yeah. That's how everybody's going to work on their horsemanship this week, is the mindful half halts in
I
everything they do,
like
not
that.
just riding. Right? You can do
Hey,
that on the ground.
we just invented that, didn't we?
We we should print that on a T-shirt.
Man,
Put it
we're
right.
brilliant. Yeah.
I love it. So, Jim, what comes to mind as one of the hardest lessons that you've had to learn in the pursuit of the Masterson method, yeah, in your pursuit of that?
The hardest lesson? I don't know. It's just it's yeah, it's a constant series of lessons. Learning something or refining something. But the hardest lesson, But as far as the body work itself goes, it's not a hard lesson. It was a surprising lesson. When I was working on a lot of horses, and I was in a, tons of horses, and I was getting really good results in performance because I learned how to soften and then ask again, and I learned how, the principle around non-resistance. When I stopped working, going down to Wellington and going on the show circuit and working on lots of horses, I work on horses. I had no time constraint, and I learned how to really wait for the horse to release,
Mm.
and so I learned that the softer you go and the more time you take and the more time you give the horse to process as you're working on it, the better results I got. So that was a really kind of surprising lesson. I don't know how many years it took me after I stopped, working on horses for a living, to recognize that, wow, I used to run into difficult horses all the time that I was working on. And all of a
Ah,
sudden, I'm not working on difficult horses. And it wasn't because I wasn't working on difficult horses. It was because I learned to I just step back and let the horse feel what's going on, even in
yeah.
training, but with body works, and then go back and do a little more.
There you
It
go.
was
The
in
ability to
that
just soften and wait.
and wait, like the horse just needs time to process physically in the nervous system what you change you just made, or if you're training, you just got to give them time to figure it out, and not just, sometimes we miss that they figured it out and we keep going, or we miss that they release the tension and we keep asking.
Right. Right, because
So
we're
that
more
was,
prepared to make the thing happen than we are
yeah,
to wait or
yeah,
process.
wait, yeah. And so it wasn't a hard lesson, it was just a surprising lesson.
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was a humbling lesson. I wasn't as smart as I thought I was.
Wow, there you go. There
Yeah,
you go. But you figured out how to wait. So I think
yeah.
it takes some good smarts to be able to do that. And
but
that's
but I
when
realized
we hear
but
people talk about the difference between a technique and a technician, right?
oh, okay,
It's
yeah,
like, hey,
right, the
you're
person
doing the
doing it.
thing. You just got to find the sequence and feel
Yeah.
the flow.
Yeah, so it was a little humbling. I wasn't as smart as I thought I was, but on the flip side, I am as stupid as I thought I was.
I got nothing to add to that one. I guess this is great. This is great.
Sorry.
So if you had, this will be the last question here,
Okay.
and I'm stealing this one from another podcaster, Tim Ferriss, just because I think it's a fantastic question. If
Okay.
you had a billboard to print a message big enough for the whole world to see, what would it be?
Well, that's an easy one. Less is more.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. I love that. That's perfect, Jim. Thank you
But
so
I do
much.
have to tell another story since you brought it up, a
Oh
billboard
yeah,
story. So when
absolutely.
I used to drive, down to Lexington or Florida or wherever, and you go across kind of the Bible Belt, and I would see these big billboards, and there was a series of them, big black billboard with some kind of a biblical quote or some religious thing on it. Which, whoops, sorry, my phone fell. And so the one I really liked that hit home, it was a big black billboard. It said, "Don't make me come down there." Is all it said.
Nice, nice.
Like it kind of took all the pressure off. Like there's a little humor in life.
There you go. That's perfect. That's
Yeah,
perfect. I like that.
had
Good.
nothing
So,
to do with horses, but
well, no, I think it's great though. I
yeah.
sometimes think about that when I ask guests that question, and it makes me think of those billboards that you're talking about, and how they'll
Mhm.
sometimes have a message that's sequenced over 6 or 8 billboards, right?
Yeah.
And it
Uh-huh.
just kind of continues on. I think
But
about
that
that.
was cool because I came across one that actually, I could hear. I had no resistance against,
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
'Cause-
I like that.
yeah.
Great. So aside from going to handinhandclinic.com, because I know everybody's got to do that now,
Mhm.
where else can folks find out more about you and the Masterson method?
Well, just our website, mastersonmethod.com.
Perfect.
Pretty, and we have a lot of YouTube videos and free videos that you can watch. I like to put it out there, things out there for people to try and see if it works for them. And if it works for them, then they'll come back and learn more or not, And so just mastersonmethod.com.
Perfect. Good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Jim, thank you so much again for joining me here, episode number
Hmm.
62 of Talking About Horses. This was a really fun chat, and
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to doing more of this, sharing more of this in person in September.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Maybe, and
It'll
maybe
be great.
even educational, but it'll be fun.
It might even be. We shall
Maybe.
see.
Yeah.
I'm
All
sure
right.
it will be for
Well,
sure. Thank you so much, Jim.
thanks to all the listeners for their patience. Actually, we did it
Right?
on purpose. We did it on purpose just so you would learn some patience. But
To build
no,
the
we didn't.
suspense. Yeah, yeah, to
Yeah,
build
build this
patience.
a bit.
Yeah,
Yeah, but that was a fun
exactly.
topic. Well, thanks
It
everybody
was great.
for waiting and joining.
Yes, yes. Thank you all
Okay.
so much.